Hey everybody, it's Kate Johnson here from Briargate Farm, home of the art of cheese. And this is day 3 in the afternoon of my cheese making, 5 days on a cheesemaker's farm. I gotta remember which program I'm doing right now. Anyhow, this is our 3rd day, and this is the afternoon segment of our series. If you hadn't joined me for the other series segments, on day 1, we visited my baby dairy goats and we bottle fed the babies, and we talked all about why we sometimes do and sometimes don't bottle feed baby goats. And then on day 2, we milked the does. So we went into our milk house and we milked the girls, and that's how come we have goat milk. And so on day 3, we're going to begin making our cheese. And so today we're going to be making Chevre. Now, just to be clear, I am not a creamery. I don't make cheese to sell. I make cheese to teach people how to make cheese. So I do offer cheese making classes, and usually they're in person in this very classroom, which is located on my farm. But due to the pandemic, we are temporarily closed to in-person classes, but we are teaching via Zoom. So there are still classes, live interactive classes offered on my website. And then I'm doing a few freebies like this Facebook Live and Instagram Live series that I'm doing. So this morning, just to kind of catch you up with where we are, I had finished milking the goats and I came into the classroom here and pasteurized the milk. Now, we had a long discussion about when you might want to do raw milk, when you might want to use pasteurized milk, and just to be clear, both of them have their pros and cons. And so we did choose to pasteurize milk. We're following the kind of recommendations set out by the FDA in our country that cheeses that don't age for at least 60 days should be made with pasteurized milk. I know some people do, some people don't. Pasteurization is not a panacea. There is post-pasteurization contamination just as easily as you could have contamination in raw milk. So don't get sloppy just because you're working with pasteurized milk. Everything still needs to be impeccably clean. So good hygiene is the name of the game. All right, so where we are now in our cheese making process, we're going to begin our Chevre. And Chevre just means goat in French, or Chevre. And so, but when people say goat cheese in this country, usually they're referring to Chevre. Now I always laugh because I make all my cheese out of goat milk because I have goats. But Chevre is the classic soft goat cheese. And there are a couple of ways you can go about this. If you are starting with clean slate cheese making or blank slate, which means you have pasteurized the milk, so none of the bacteria or cultures are left, we need to then add culture. So let's just take a quick look here. I'll turn this around so you can see my selection of cultures. So the culture that we're going to use for Chevre is called mesophilic culture. And you can get this culture, most of us home cheesemakers get it at the New England Cheesemaking Supply Company, cheesemaking.com. And they come in these little packets, which are just individual little serving sizes, or you can get it in a big bulk packet. So it kind of depends on how much cheese you're planning to make. It's more economical if you're making a lot of cheese to get the bulk packet. But if you're just going to make a little bit of cheese, getting that little packet's fine. Now they also carry a culture called Chevre or Chevre. This is what's called an all-in-one culture. And as you're going to see here in a moment, we're going to add culture now, and then a little bit later we're going to add rennet. So let me show you the picture of the rennet. I have here a bottle of liquid animal rennet and liquid vegetable rennet. So for those of you who are not familiar with rennet, rennet is an enzyme. So culture is bacteria, and culture, when we put it into milk, it starts to consume the lactose in the milk, that's the sugars, and it converts that lactose to lactic acid. So that is how we're acidifying our milk when we're making cheese. And most of the time, that's how it's made. And then the second step to that is to coagulate the milk, to pull all those solids together and separate them from the liquids in the milk. So that's the curds and the whey, right? So most of the time we are using rennet, this enzyme that will coagulate milk. Now, animal rennet does come from an animal part. It's an enzyme found in the lining of a baby animal's stomach. Usually it's veal rennet. So if you're a little squeamish about that, there are vegetarian rennets as well. Okay, but the first step of making Chevre just involves adding the culture. And so I'm gonna just get a little culture ready here, and then I'll turn this around and show you. So it's mesophilic culture, and for a half gallon, which is what I'm using, it's a 1/16 of a teaspoon. So it's not very much. Now, I'm only gonna actually add half of that because I'm gonna add the other half when I go onto my Instagram channel. But let me just turn this around and show you how we add that. So I've got my milk warmed up just to room temperature. It's about 72, 75 degrees, somewhere in that range. And I just take my culture and I'm just on the surface of the milk. Okay. And so then I'm gonna let it sit there for a few minutes to hydrate. And then I'm gonna stir it in with a little up and down motion to stir it into the milk. And that's it for 2 hours. I'm gonna let it just sit there for 2 hours at room temperature. Okay, so what is happening during that 2 hours? It's ripening. It's converting lactose to lactic acid and thereby making the milk more acidic. And that acidity is necessary before we can coagulate the milk. So literally that's all I have to do for this first step. I often tell people Chevre is the easiest cheese in the world to make if you have goat milk. If you don't have a good supply of goat milk, it can be a little tricky to find a good source of goat milk that isn't ultra pasteurized, because ultra pasteurized milk will not make cheese. Okay. So I've just stirred that into the pot, and now I'm gonna put the lid on, and I'm gonna leave it sit for 2 hours. Now, I won't be back here in 2 hours. I'm gonna be back tomorrow morning, so I'll tell you what I'm gonna do in 2 hours. In 2 hours, I'm gonna come back and add my rennet. Remember, rennet is the enzyme that coagulates the curd, okay? So the way that we add the rennet, and I'll just turn this around again and show you, it's a tiny little bit of rennet that is added to Chevre. So what we're gonna just do is take our little measuring cup here. This is non-chlorinated water, okay? You can either make your own non-chlorinated water by boiling water, bring it back to room temperature. You can use filtered water, you can use distilled water, lots of choices. But it needs to have no chlorine in it because chlorine will kill the rennet, or at least deactivate it. Now, this recipe for 1 gallon of milk calls for 2 drops of rennet, hardly any rennet. I'm actually going to use vegetarian rennet, which is double strength. So theoretically, I would only need 1 drop per gallon, but I only have a half a gallon, so I would need half a drop. I don't ever divide it in half. I just put a drop of rennet in here. Now, normally, oops, I put 2 drops. That's okay, I'm not gonna actually use this one because we wouldn't want to add our rennet to our water before we put it in the cheese by more than a few minutes. Because once that rennet actually gets into the water, it starts to lose some of its strength. So I'm actually gonna come back in 2 hours and remix that rennet. Just 1 drop, I'm gonna put it in the milk, I'm gonna put the lid on, and I'm going to bed. Well, maybe not at 7:30, but who knows, I might. But at any rate, it's gonna then just sit all night at room temperature. I am literally gonna be sleeping while this cheese is being made. That's why I always say, Chevre is so easy, you can make it in your sleep. So that's it, and that's the first part of making Chevre, is just add your culture, wait a couple hours, come back, add a drop of rennet, go to bed. Now, when we get up in the morning, and I'll show you that tomorrow when you come, I'm gonna have this beautiful curd. That whole bunch of milk is all gonna pull together and solidify or coagulate. And then there'll be a next step, okay? So I'll show you that tomorrow morning. But that is how easy making Chevre is. Now, Chevre is what's called a lactic set cheese or a rennet-assisted cheese. And what that means is we're using a tiny bit of rennet, but it has a long coagulation time. Okay, so 1 drop of rennet 12 to 20 hours that it's going to coagulate. Whereas, let's say feta, which is another cheese that I often make, is what's called a fully renneted cheese. And what that means is it has a lot of rennet with a short coagulation time. So when I make feta, I use about 1/4 teaspoon of rennet for the same amount of milk and only an hour of coagulation. So, you know, most cheeses have 4 ingredients: milk, culture, rennet, and salt. And most cheeses, or many cheeses, have the exact same ingredients. In fact, when I make feta out of goat milk, I use exactly the same ingredients that I'm going to use for making Chevre. I use goat milk, I use mesophilic culture, I use rennet, and I use salt. How are they so different? I mean, think about Chevre versus feta, totally different cheeses, right? They're different because I'm doing a different amount of those ingredients. I'm doing it at different temperatures. I'm doing it for different amounts of time. And then I am going to use different techniques. Let's see. Deanne asked if I use vegan rennet. I don't know that it's vegan, it's vegetable rennet. So there are all kinds of different vegetarian rennets. This particular one from New England Cheesemaking Supply, I don't know that it's actually vegan, but it is vegetarian. There are rennets made out of thistle, the thistle plant, so that's obviously vegan. So I couldn't even answer that for you to tell you for sure if this is vegan, but I would think it is, but I don't know the answer to that. But you could always check with New England Cheesemaking Supply and ask them if it's vegan, because that's where I get it. All right, so that is the simple beginning of Chevre. So if you just joined me, I'll give you a quick synopsis, and then we're going to jump over to my Instagram channel, The Art of Cheese Longmont, and do this again. So just a little summary of where we are, and I will turn this around so you can see. We are in my cheesemaking classroom. It's located on my farm in Longmont called Briargate Farm, and right out the door, I'll just take you to visit them real quick, are my goats. So there they are down there. So we're really close to the goats. I don't think I can make this closer. And right now we're not doing any in-person classes because we can't. So we're teaching via Zoom. So I'm gonna go back in here. If you wanna take any classes with us, just look at my website. Oh, sorry, that's so noisy. theartofcheese.com. And we have some classes listed there. I know Joe, who's watching, just took my 7-day cheese challenge. He did awesome. And we're doing that again later in May 18th, I believe that begins. 7 cheeses in 7 days. Really, really fun. All right, so I've got my Chevre started. I'm gonna leave you for now because I gotta run over to Instagram and do this all again. And then I will be back tomorrow morning here at 8 a.m. to scoop curd. Okay, what we're gonna have is a nice, beautiful curd sitting here, and I'm gonna scoop that curd into cheesecloth, and then we're gonna wait again. There's a lot of waiting in some of these cheeses. Some cheeses you actually are doing a little bit more, but these lactic set cheeses, there's just a lot of waiting going on. And finally, by the end on day 5, we will have cheese that I'll get to taste. You won't get to taste it until you make your own or until our classes resume. All right, so thank you all for coming today, and I will maybe see you later. Maybe I'll see you over at Instagram, and maybe I will see you tomorrow morning here. All right, so thanks all. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.